Today we're going to talk about Julia Perry, who was a mid-20th century African-American composer whose life and music has been a subject that we've been really interested in as an organization over the last couple of years. And Olivia helped us with a recording project last summer, and we're going to share the videos of the recordings that we made. But before I get started, I want to give Olivia a chance to introduce herself.
Hello, my name is Olivia Johnson. I'm a graduate of the University of Michigan in 2017. In 2020-21, I was a young artist at Toledo Opera, and this year I have the pleasure of being an artist in resident for ＡPEX Contemporary Performance. And I'm so excited to share with you this project that I did with them in June of this past summer. I hope you all enjoy.
And Olivia was just part of the wonderful Detroit Opera production of Anthony Davis's X. That was a huge success. So congratulations to Olivia and her colleagues. So I'm gonna share my screen now, and I'm going to talk a little bit about ＡPEX, what we've been up to since our last event at the Ann Arbor District Library, and then share some biographical information about Julia Perry and set the context for why we decided to record her music last year. So again, we're an ＡPEX Contemporary Performance is a nonprofit concert presenting organization. We were founded in 2015 by myself and a conductor named Kevin Fitzgerald. We were grad students at the University of Michigan. Our mission is to celebrate the music of rarely performed and underrepresented 20th and 21st century composers. And so a lot of our programming is intentionally focused on representing diverse composers. Since our first concert on December 7th, 2015, we've organized over 30 events and programmed over 110 composers. And so we're very happy with what we've been able to do over the last few years. And we have a series of performances next week, our first in what we hope to be an annual festival in Ypsilanti. And Olivia will be performing on Thursday, June 2nd at First Presbyterian Church in Ypsilanti, so please visit our website, aepexcontemporary.org/festival, to get information about that, tickets and that sort of thing. We have performances June 1st through 4th. There's some free events and some ticketed events too, so please check that out, and we hope to see you. You're going to love hearing Olivia sing in video, and it's even better in person, I promise that. So, like Jackie mentioned at the very beginning of this, we did an event in 2019 at the Ann Arbor District Library. One of our last in-person events as an organization, given the timing of everything. And this was to talk about a new research initiative that we had started the summer of 2019 called the ＡPEX Anthology. It was essentially taking our mission of trying to support underrepresented and rarely performed composers and applying that to some flaws in the way music is taught collegiately, so limited resources and instructional materials, and then also figuring out some of the barriers to getting those composers music on the concert stage, which has to do with the way music is taught in college for sure, but also like engraving manuscript scores and creating recordings like the project we did last year with Olivia. So here's kind of an overview of what we've been up to since 2019. Fortunately, a lot of this work is easy to do remotely, so it hasn't slowed down since the pandemic. We've shared materials and resources with people at 44 universities around the world, including these, put instructional materials and textbooks. This has led to some publications at these outlets forthcoming and past. And then we've had some really interesting artistic partnerships with artists or non-university institutions or performing institutions such as Laura Downs, her Amplified project, the West Virginia Symphony Chanticleer, the vocal ensemble. And since September, I've been participating in a wonderful working group of musicians, scholars, mostly in the United States, some overseas, who are specifically focused on Julia Perry's life and music. And a couple of people, including Louise Toppin of the University of Michigan, is in the audience, and so is Christopher Wilkins from the Akron Symphony. And so we found a lot of flexible ways to pursue research, and there's always a strong connection with performance and the music making, in addition to learning about these composers and working with their materials. And that's what our project with Julia Perry really came down to, is getting her music, performing her music, recording it, so that people can hear it and understand that she was a wonderful composer. So let's talk about Julia Perry. Well, I'm not going to introduce Julia Perry. I'm going to let Julia Perry introduce herself by playing a clip from a 1954 post-concert Q&A session at Columbia University. They performed Stabat Mater, one of the pieces we'll be talking about and sharing the recording of today, in 1954, along with a piece by George Antheil, the famous experimental American composer. This is a clip from the post-concert talk. And Julia Perry is going to introduce herself, and the first voice you're going to hear is the moderator, Aaron Copeland. So here we go. Let's hear what Julia Perry has to say.
Ms. Perry, since you're right next to me, perhaps you'd like to, or perhaps you'd be kind enough to, tell us where you come from and something about your studies and maybe where you're heading for.
Well, I can tell you from where I come and something about my studies, but where I'm heading, I don't know. My home is Akron, Ohio, and I went to Westminster Choir College in 1947, or rather graduated in 1947, and received a master's degree in 1948. In 1950, I went to Juilliard and studied orchestral conducting. 51, the summer of 51, I received a scholarship to Tanglewood and studied with Luigi Dalla Piccola. From there, I went to Florence and stayed nearly 2 years, returning last August. It's about
Are you really going to be that modest about what your ideals are for the future, what you hope to do? Are you planning to teach?
Well, if I can get around it, no. I want to return to Europe, if I can, to Florence, and continue with Dalla Piccola for a while longer.
Mm-hmm. What did you write while you were working with Mr. Dalla Piccola?
Well, I wrote a piece for orchestra. I call it a piece for orchestra. I could call it an episode or Green on Green or something, but I just chose it. And a work based on letters of St. Catherine of Siena for solo voice, chorus, and chamber orchestra, and a one-act opera by one of our American writers, Edgar Allan Poe. And at present, I'm working on a string quartet.
Okay. So you got a good overview, not only of her education, but her wonderful sense of humor, which is one of my favorite things about that clip. This is a picture of Julia Perry when she was 2 years old. She was born in Kentucky in 1924. She's the smaller person in the photo. She was born in Kentucky in 1924 and then moved to Akron. Like she said in that clip, she calls Akron her home, and she's associated with Akron. She studied with, she went to Westminster Choir College, Juilliard, Tanglewood, like she said. She studied with Dalla Piccola. She also studied with Nadia Boulanger, the famous music composition teacher in France. And she won Guggenheim fellowships to study in Italy with Dalla Piccola. The opera that she mentions, based on Edgar Allan Poe, is a adaptation of The Cask of Amontillado, which would be performed at Columbia University later the same year as that Q&A. In 1957, she worked a lot as a conductor too. In 1957, she led a concert tour across Europe that was celebrated by critics under the sponsorship of the US government. This is a picture of Julia Perry on the right with her mother on the left from 1951, which is the year that she composed Stabat Mater. So unlike what she said in that clip, what she joked about, she did end up teaching a little bit. She taught at Florida A&M University in 1967. In 1964, she won an award from the American Academy and National Institute of Arts and Letters. And in 1965, she had a work performed by the New York Philharmonic, and we'll talk a little bit more about that experience because it's kind of a defining episode in her career. According to the International Dictionary of Black Composers, she wrote 81 pieces across basically every kind of genre of music a composer would write at the time. So choral, vocal, chamber music, orchestral, concertos, wind band music. She has settings of spirituals as well. So she was very accomplished. And this is an image from the cover of one of her orchestra pieces that was commissioned by the Akron Symphony. When I heard that Christopher Wilkins from the Akron Symphony would be here today, I wanted to make sure I included that. This, with a composer as accomplished as Julia Perry, and sort of speaking to the point of doing this kind of research as a concert presenting organization, the question we want to pursue is, why is her music not more well known? And when in my previous presentation, almost 3 years ago, and sort of the impetus for doing this research through ＡPEX had to do with the way music is taught typically in undergraduate music curricula, overcoming the barriers that keeps composers like Julia Perry or her peers historically out of textbooks and curricula and that sort of thing. Because Julia Perry is a 20th century figure, though, we wouldn't expect her to be in a textbook as much. And so the factors are a little bit different. At the time, her career began before the passage of the Civil Rights Act. So she was a Black woman composer at a time when there was a lot of systemic legalized oppression for people with her identity in the United States. That's definitely a factor. Also, this manuscript image that we see is a factor too. A lot of her music only exists in manuscripts, and that makes it very difficult for orchestras or other groups, not just to find, but to perform. And anytime there's a little bit of friction in getting a composer's music to the stage, a lot of presenting organizations or orchestras or opera companies are going to choose the path of least resistance. And so with a composer, and we'll see that in the episode surrounding her piece performed by the New York Philharmonic. So it's very important to acknowledge the factors of her identity and socio-political limitations that she faced. But also, when perhaps contingent on that, she dealt with a lack of resources her entire career. And for that reason, she has manuscript scores, not fancy published scores, and that's a big difference. There are other factors too that we'll talk about as well. So I brought up her experience with the New York Philharmonic in 1964 and 1965. This is a handwritten letter that she sent to the librarian of the New York Philharmonic shortly before her piece was performed in May of 1965. And it's the culmination of months of correspondence about the parts for her piece. She did not have the money to hire somebody to produce the parts. The orchestra was consistently dissatisfied with the quality of the parts that she produced, and there was a back and forth. It speaks to sometimes when there's a term I see associated with discussions of equity and for students in higher education called the invisible curriculum, that there are things that privileged institutions take for granted about having privileged students in terms of finances and other things. And I think this is a good example of that happening in the career of a composer in the mid-20th century, because she couldn't just manifest New York Philharmonic quality parts, and they weren't in the practice of assisting with that. There was this conflict that created a lot of friction, and I'm sure disincentivized them from continuing to work with her. This is a very interesting letter. I don't know how clearly you can read it. She talks about how she cannot afford reproduction costs at the time, and then that's before the line in the middle of the page. And then she talks about how she wants them to send a score of hers to Leonard Bernstein, whom she had met when she won in 1964, when she won the award from the Academy of Arts and National Institute of Arts and Letters, whatever it was called at the time. She mentions some other high-profile people who she was talking to with Leonard Bernstein, Otto Luning, who was a composer at Columbia University, Lillian Hellman, and he was interested in the piece, and she wanted the orchestra to forward it to him. It's a piece called Liberation, so it's political, and she mentions how she's advocated for artist rights and that sort of thing. This document is a very interesting representation of sort of the paradox of Julia Perry's career, where she had access to the echelons of power and influence to be on stage with Aaron Copland at Columbia University, making everyone laugh, or charm Leonard Bernstein into wanting to look at her piece, but she lacked the resources to be able to execute these other tasks that were considered, de rigueur for composers at the time, like producing her parts, and she couldn't find help doing that. It also didn't help that she got, at least in the New York Times, she consistently got very unfavorable reviews. So this is a review of the performance of Study for Orchestra that the correspondence with the New York Philharmonic was related to. There were two shows. This one had Van Cliburn, the pianist, on it. The other had Itzhak Perlman. So they put her on a star-studded program. But Harold Schoenberg, the critic for the New York Times, just did not like her piece very much. And there are other reviews in the New York Times that are unfavorable. My suspicion is that at the time they were just not very fond of a lot of music by living composers. And so combined with the issues, maybe the challenges working with Julia Perry from the New York Philharmonic's perspective, if she's not going to get good press, of course they're not going to continue to work with her. Now, her music continues to be performed, and people advocate for her in the 1970s and 1980s, even though her career is on the decline. You can see post advertisements for performances of Stabat Mater in New York City in the 70s and 80s. An interesting document I found, this is from a letter to the editor in 1971. I don't know who Paul Elliott is besides the author of this, but he's making an argument that would feel very modern to us now in 2022, but people have been making for a long time, which is we have to take steps to make it easier for composers who are discriminated against to have opportunities. And he specifically mentions Julia Perry, who was still alive at the time. This is 6 years after her piece was played by the New York Philharmonic. And it's a very similar motivation to why we decided to record her music in 2021, where it needs to be heard. It's very compelling music, and she should have the opportunity to get it recorded and performed. It's interesting to me that he mentions that Leonard Bernstein conducted her music, because that suggests maybe the score that she wanted him to see, he found and then performed, but I haven't been able to find any evidence that that performance took place. So I don't know. I don't know about that. This is from Mildred Denby Green's book, Black Women Composers, A Genesis, which is the book version of her. She was a musicologist, and this is the book version of her dissertation, which studied the lives and music of African-American women composers in the 20th century. And I think she does an excellent job summing up why Julia Perry is an interesting and important composer. She is a modernist composer. There's a very interesting school of African-American modernist composers in the mid-20th century that I consider her a part of, with other people like Ulysses Kay and Arthur Cunningham. At least they were contemporaries. And as you'll hear in the pieces that we recorded, it is abstract at times, but very expressionistic and compelling, and particularly the Stabat Mater has a lot of different aesthetics and stylistic moments in the piece, and it's very eclectic, which is one of the words that Mildred Denby Groom uses a lot to describe Julia Perry's music. I find it very compelling, and of course that's ultimately Julia Perry's music deserves to be heard because it's extremely compelling music. Before sharing a little bit about the recording project last year and letting Olivia talk about her process preparing the piece, I wanted to share one more clip, about 90 seconds, of Julia Perry talking about Stabat Mater in the same Columbia University post-concert talk that we heard from earlier. And here the first question is about the text. So it's sometimes performed in Latin, but she intentionally wanted it in English. She talks about that, and she talks a little bit more about the piece. So here we go.
Miss Perry, here's a double question. Why did you use an English text for your work, and why didn't you sing it yourself?
Well, I used an English text because I think the majority of us don't know Latin. And I think a translation is helpful. And the second question is because I'm not a singer.
Here's a question for you again. What inspired you to write Stabat Mater for only solo voice and strings when it is usually written for large ensemble?
Well, I wanted to see if I could write a Stabat Mater for solo voice. I think it's taxing on the singer, I suppose, but I'd heard the Rossini and the Pergolesi and the Palestrina, and they're all for more voices and large orchestra. But I think the real reason that I wanted to experiment with one voice was that I admire greatly Marian Anderson, and I had originally intended this work for her voice.
Okay. Before Olivia talks about her experience preparing the piece, I just wanted to give a little bit of context for this recording project we did. ÄPEX recorded Stabat Mater and Pastoral in June 2021 at the Riverside Arts Center in Ypsilanti. It was originally envisioned as a concert, and then we decided to just do a recording session. We partnered with a local videographer named Nelson T. Gast, who, as you'll see, did a wonderful job. And then we also had a photographer here who took these pictures. And Olivia Johnson was our soloist for Stabat Mater, and Bryce Smith, who was not able to join us today, he was the soloist for Pastoral. So before sharing the piece, I want to give Olivia an opportunity to talk about her experience learning this work.
Yeah, it was an absolutely beautiful piece. When I first looked at it, I was a little overwhelmed because it is difficult music. It is difficult singing because Stabat Mater for Julia Perry is her first major work, and it marks her first time truly delving into experimenting in music. So I believe this piece is kind of her formula for her later works. So as I was working through it, the biggest thing for me was just mapping it out. Whatever work I go through, especially chamber, instrumental music, where I'm the soloist, I always lay it out and I just draw lines to the instruments to know who I'm blending with, who I'm getting my notes from, what to listen for, and also whatever instrument is playing at the time also informs how I color my sound. So it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed the rehearsal process and just seeing the amazing instrumentalists in front of me and just being able to converse and collaborate. I really love collaborating, especially with instrumentalists. So it was a treat for me. And also, above and beyond, just paying attention to the text. My mentor and former teacher, Professor George Shirley, always made sure to stress that text is important and telling the story, and that we are first communicators before we are singers. So just paying attention to that. And also, as I was going through the process of working on the project, I noticed that yes, this is from the perspective of Mary, but typically I've sung through part of the Rossini and I've looked at the other versions of Stabat Mater, and I find that Julia Perry truly looked at it from the perspective of a mother. It's something that you'll notice as you listen to it. It isn't this glorified, glamorous adoration of a mother losing her son. It's truly a very human experience, which I find is missing in the other ones. I particularly loved the ending where she talks about paradise, and you'll hear it. But paradise really isn't this beautiful thing. It's this place where her son is going, who she misses, who she loves, who she can no longer be with. Another interesting fact is that Stabat Mater by Julia Perry was dedicated to her mother. So it's a very personal thing. And I love the fact that this is a work done by a woman. And I think that also enriches the text and the story of the mother of Jesus Christ. So those are my thoughts, and I hope you enjoy listening. Yeah.
That makes me think of the picture I showed, and maybe I should show it again, of her and her mother, which is from the year that this piece was written. And I'll share I don't have the image, so yeah, 1951. So she's on a boat, I think Julia Perry is about to depart to Europe, perhaps. And on the back, it says mother with crybaby. So I think you make an excellent point about the connection to motherhood is very strong in this. And obviously, it would appear evidence which would suggest that she had a strong relationship with her mother. Before we're going to listen to Pastoral first, because it's the shorter of the two pieces, and I think what you'll find listening to both is an incredible amount of contrast. Julia Perry's music has an enormous range in terms of aesthetic. She has some very abstract experimental pieces, and then there are a lot of romantic moments in the Stabat Mater, which I think speaks to her talent as a composer. Pastoral, when I remember talking to Bryce about this after we recorded it, it's like a piece with solo flute that doesn't really showcase the flute at all. It's a very different approach to having a soloist than the Stabat Mater, where Olivia's part is really the centerpiece. So I'll encourage you to listen with Pastoral, like textures and blending and timbres between the ensemble and Bryce. And then the Stabat Mater, for me as a listener, is just a tour de force for the soloist, and Olivia does a spectacular job. So without any further ado, we will go to Pastoral, and then we'll listen to Stabat Mater, and then after that, we'll take some questions. I'm going to
When
I wanted to note, I looked this up during the Stabat Mater. There is one commercial recording of the piece from 1959. It was recorded with the Japanese Philharmonic Orchestra. Oddly, it is one of the best reviewed things that I've found for Julia Perry, and Olivia's smiling because it's not really a good recording at all. Olivia's performance certainly is I like to think the new standard in Stabat Mater performances. But that, in addition to her scores being difficult to find and then not fitting into the easy systems of performance because they're manuscripts, when there's only, she has a couple other pieces that have performed a little bit. She has a very interesting percussion piece that has been, I think, recorded the most. But when you don't have any recordings and your music is hard to find and then incompatible with the systems in place, of course, that's going to lead to not having the most enduring career, even though that it's not really just in terms of the quality of her music. Well, Jackie, I know you sent me a question that I'll answer, which was, where did I find these materials? They're all online. The things that I shared in this presentation, the photographs of Julia Perry, are from the Rider University archives, which Rider University is the home university to Westminster Choir College, where she studied. And then the letter with the New York Philharmonic is from the New York Philharmonic's digital archives, specifically for that the conductor at the time, William Steinberg, I believe. It was all of his papers, and that's where all the correspondence about her performance is there. I found it using Google. Late one night, 3 days after our second child was born. So watching a very new baby. And I think we had just had a meeting of the working group that I'm a part of with Christopher and Louise, who are here. First, I was just awake and motivated and found all these things. So, and then I used ProQuest, which is a normal source for periodical archiving, to find all of I was like, I want to see every instance of Julia Perry's name in the New York Times from 1950 to 1990. And that's where I found those really unfair reviews, in my opinion. So. We have a question from Louise Toppin. I congratulate you on your work on Julia Perry and thank you for this wonderful presentation. Thank you very much. Would you share what you hope to do next musically with Perry? I don't know if that's for me or for you, Olivia, so I think we should both answer. I mean, she has a lot of unperformed music that as far as I know, and so I would love to do another recording project at some point. I know that's one of the goals of the other members of this working group that I'm in with Professor Toppin. I think specifically there's a piece of hers, another vocal piece that I'm very interested in, and the name is it's like called Six Contrasts or something. It's for male voice. It's for like baritone and piano. I'd be very interested in that. I think the Stabat Mater is her vocal piece I know the most, and I think her vocal writing is really, really terrific. And so I'd be interested in exploring that. I don't think there's a recording. Thank you. Yeah. Olivia, what do you think?
I know personally that I would love to take another stab at Stabat Mater, to try it again. I feel that, especially this year, with all that I've done, I've been growing as a person and as a singer. And so it's one of those projects where it was fun and it was wonderful and it was beautiful. And I want to do it again. I want to see if I can do it better than the last time. because her music's so difficult. But I believe that with any contemporary piece, I always want it to be as musical as possible. So I would love to address this piece again in the future. And I would love to see one of her operas on stage, or to be a part of that kind of project, because I'm so curious as to what that would sound like. Yeah.
I know that my friend Naomi Andre would remind me that there was a and maybe Professor Toppin remembers this. There was a performance of A Cask of Amontillado in Ypsilanti in like 2018, I think, or 17, something like that, by a different vocalist named Olivia Duval, so also an Olivia. And I didn't go to that. I don't know anything about it, but it would be very interesting. I mean, for me, with this kind of research, I'm always, oh, it was wonderful. That's excellent. That's excellent. I mean, I have the score. I have no idea what the piece is like. I'm very attracted to like the most, whatever the sort of most misunderstood or difficult to perform or kind of thing. I mean, with Stabat Mater and Pastoral, these are pieces that have been published, so they were easy to perform, even though they've been published, but the parts, in any of the editions, the parts are incomplete for the string ensemble, and I spent the night before the first rehearsal constructing a double bass part out of the score, which I did in a flash, amazingly. But so that just speaks to the challenge. But she has some really unusually the instrumentation for some of her pieces is really unusual, and it'd be interesting to try one of those. Hearing some of her music for winds would be cool, because I haven't heard anything like that. So. Oh, yes. Well, so Professor Toppin and one of the other people involved in this working group, a conductor named James Blatchley, I think that's how his last name is pronounced, I'm not sure. They did a concert in New York City in October, November, that included a piece, like a symphony for violas and double basses, I think. Very unusual instrumentation. I haven't been able to listen to the recording, but again, one of the things, it's interesting, the 1965 New York Philharmonic program she's on with Stravinsky, and Stravinsky has a bunch of pieces that have unusual instrumentations, like the Symphony of Psalms doesn't have any violins and that sort of thing. It's interesting who gets to get away with that sort of thing, because I think for Julia Perry, it's a barrier perhaps to being performed, to having these unusually scored pieces, and for Stravinsky, it's something that's intriguing. And there are obviously big differences between the two of them, but there are more performances happening. The Minnesota Orchestra did a fabulous performance of the Study for Orchestra, like in March or something, or maybe it was probably February. And I know that piece, I believe she has piece for short orchestra, study for short orchestra. I think it's all the same piece. It might not be. Someone else from the working group may know better than I. That piece has been performed, I think, 3 times in the last year. And prior to that, it had only been performed like once or twice in the last decade. And so there's definitely some momentum building. It's a short piece. I'm sure part of the reason she wrote it that way in 1965 was so it would be attractive to orchestras, and that didn't work. But I think it probably helps that it's a short piece. And the Minnesota Orchestra's performance was really, really strong, which is great. Having good performances is really, really important. And so the more that she gets, I think the better. Yes. Oh, that's great. So, Louise, could you share is that database in the African Diaspora Music Project? Yes. So Professor Toppin is involved with this wonderful initiative called the African Diaspora Music Project, which is a different thing than the Julia Perry Working Group, but kind of connected. That's sort of how I got connected with Dr. Toppin. And so it's obviously expanded on, thank you very much, Christopher. Obviously, the subject matter for the African Diaspora Music Project is much larger than just the Julia Perry Music Group. But they do have a website. It is africandiasporamusicproject.org, and that's a fantastic resource. And apparently, the Minnesota Orchestra performance of that piece is available on their website. So. Oh, that's terrific! It's wonderful. Professor Toppin has said that the Minnesota Orchestra is one of the African Diaspora Music Project's partners, and it's really great. You know, ＡPEX is a very small organization with a very small budget, and so we're very limited in what we're able to do. The Minnesota Orchestra has a much larger budget than we do, and it's very important for tentpole presenters like that, or what the Detroit Opera has been doing of late with the Anthony Davis production. It's part of the challenge is to make sure that these sorts of programming initiatives get into that sphere of performance. Unfortunately, it's necessary in order for these composers to be taken seriously by a broader public, even though people in the field know that, you know, quality or the deservingness of being programmed isn't necessarily tied to where you get performed and that sort of thing. And what I found, this makes me think of something that I find consistently in doing this research, is you see performances like that 1965 concert with Julia Perry on it, you know, one or two performances of one piece by one composer who is a woman or a person of color or both, in Julia Perry's case. And that's, you know, that 1965 is almost 60 years ago, and it's considered, you know, now people are like, oh, that's making a difference. Well, not. It's really doing, you know, what people thought making a difference was 60 years ago. And I think something that I consistently run into is that we're not going far enough in terms of trying to do corrective things to programming practices. And there's a earlier African-American composer named Harry Lawrence Freeman, who I've done a lot of research on, and he wrote operas primarily in the late 19th century and early 20th century. And like, he had his music programmed by the Cleveland Orchestra on a concert with Beethoven in 1893 as like a way to be like, oh, look at this composer who has a different identity. And so just doing a one-off performance is kind of a normal thing, has been a normal thing for over 100 years for orchestra. So it's good to see partnerships like what Professor Toppin is talking about with the Minnesota Orchestra, where they're really investing in trying to do things differently, because I think that's critical. And hopefully smaller initiatives like what ＡPEX is trying to do can help participate in that overall trend. At least that's what we hope. That might be a good place to stop if we don't have any more questions. Olivia, is there anything you wanted to add after we watched the performance or anything? I think I cannot imagine you doing a better job. I thought you did such a great job. But of course, I would love to hear you sing it again. So I hope that can happen sometime. So
yeah, I'm my greatest critic, and I always want to do things better than I did it the last time. And I just love her music so much, and I hope that it does become a standard. So I hope I get tapped on the shoulder again to continue to work on her music, because I think it's beautiful. And I think whenever you address a contemporary piece, if you can make it as tangible as possible for the audience, more people will be likely to want to hear it. So yeah. That's my thought. But I'm thankful, and I'm thankful that ＡPEX asked me to be a part of this project.
Oh, we're very happy that we were able to work with you. So, well,
I'm going to
yeah,
jump in
thank
and
you.
say
Yeah.
the library is really happy to work with you, and thank you guys so much for bringing this to us. I've once again very much enjoyed your program, and I love working with you guys, and I can't wait for what you guys do next.
Well, we can't wait to come back too. We're really happy to have a home here at the Ann Arbor District Library. So
Yes, and next time we'll fill up the lobby again like we did back in 2019.
yes.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you allowing us to record this program so that we can save it for folks who weren't able to attend today. And if you wanted to tell us again about what programs you have coming up next week.
Yes, so June 1st through 4th, we have we're doing a little festival in Ypsilanti and downtown and Depot Town. There are free events on the 1st and the 4th, and then we have our main stage concerts on the 2nd and 3rd, for the first of which on that Thursday is Olivia's solo recital called New Art Songs by Black Women Composers, which is a program Olivia designed all on her own. And then on Friday, we have a large ensemble performance at the Ypsi Freight House that includes a world premiere by me, and then a piece by Tyson Davis, who's a really terrific up-and-coming composer who goes to Juilliard, and Augusta Reed Thomas, who's one of the big-name American composers right now. Oh, and a wonderful note in the chat that next season, Dr. Louise Toppin is performing with the Akron Symphony one of the pieces that Julia Perry talked about, the fragments from the letters of St. Catherine of Siena, which was one of the pieces that she mentioned from 1954. So through time, now that piece is going to come, and it will, I hope I can go down to Akron to hear that. I think that'll be great. So
that's wonderful. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much.